We will now start our afternoon session. We are very thankful to have a guest speaker here with us today, Dr. Sean Clanky from the Ontario University of Commerce. He's a professor in the Language Center at the Ontario University of Commerce, specializing in linguistics. He is here today to talk to us on the topic of materials development.
All right, thank you all for coming today. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Sean Clanky. I'm a professor of applied linguistics at Ontario University of Commerce. And today I'm going to be taking you through materials development and what it is to be a materials developer and what techniques and lessons I've learned that might be applicable to you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. No? Can you hear me now? All right. I'll hold the mic then. If it gets too loud, you can scream at me again. All right. Thank you all for coming today. It's really a pleasure to be here. I just got back in the country about 2 days ago. I'm on sabbatical, and it's nice to be back and nice to see so many faces. I am a materials developer. I've been a materials developer for about 15 years. And materials development, as I like to tell people, goes beyond the classroom. It's not only what we do with our students in the classroom in terms of creating exercises and creating activities for them, but also it goes beyond that. And I'll show you why today. Okay? So some of the things that I work on books. I've done more than 30 books now. And I am always looking for the newest activity, the newest idea, something that's going to spark interest in not only in the students, but in the teachers who are teaching the students as well. And as you'll hear at some point in this talk, and I'll reinforce it, is that textbooks are always a compromise. Okay? They're a compromise between the writer and the publisher and the teachers who are using them. And they're never exactly the way you want them to be. They're never the way we want them to be as authors, because we're always trying to create innovative and new activities. On the publisher's side, they are looking for consistency. It's their money that's involved. And they want things that work, proven, true activities that work. That's why you tend to see the same activities again and again and again and again in textbooks. They've been developed over time. And they're considered to be accurate and working activities. It's my job as a materials designer to try to change that, and to try to create new activities that are going to inspire our students so that they will succeed in what they're doing. I'll touch more on that a little bit later. Another thing that I work on as a materials developer is something called the English Lecture Series. All right? The English Lecture Series at Ontario University of Commerce I began in 2010. And the idea behind it was I was trying to create an experience for my students that was similar to what they would experience at an American university or an American high school. All right? Where they have guest speakers coming in a lot, where they have people there to inspire them and to show them language in use. All right? We're in Japan, we're in Hokkaido. Sometimes we'll hear our students say, I don't have opportunities to actually hear a native speaker or see a native speaker beyond those that they have in their classrooms. And so we give them that experience. Here are three of them. One's a former professor, there's an artist, and that's Gilad Atzmon. He was BBC Jazz Album of the Year award winner in 2003. He's come twice for us. And we brought everyone in from writers to artists to musicians to ambassadors. We had the minister who was in charge of the Sydney Olympics come. All right? This is another part of the materials development experience that I'm involved in. And I call this a materials development exercise because we tape these lectures and they end up on our YouTube channel, which, if you're interested, is under the YouTube name Ontario Shodai, and there are about 120 videos up right now that you can take a look at. The former speakers who have come, there are musical performances, there are speakers, there are artists. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create as many experiences for our students as possible. And I think you'll see that throughout this presentation today. So there's the YouTube channel, and YouTube, our students watch it a lot. So it's a good experience for them. I also do some work for Hokkaido Shimbun in the Shiribeshi region. If you're in Shiribeshi, which is Niseko, Kuchan, Yoichi, over to Otaru, Kimobetsu, Makari, all of that area, there's English phrases that appear in the newspaper Mondays, I think Monday through Friday. And then there's a summary, a video summary on Saturday that comes out on the website. Hokkaido Shimbun approached me to do this because they got this sudden inflow of tourists coming in. For those of you who have been here for 3 or 4 years, you'll know that there's been a recent tourism boom coming in, and a lot of the businesses in Shiribeshi were a little bit nervous because suddenly they're getting a lot of people coming in and they don't quite know what to say. They're thankful to have them, but they'd like to learn a little bit more English to be able to support those visitors who are coming. And so we have this in the newspaper, and then we have videos up on the thing. So this is part of what I do as a materials developer. I'm always looking for the next thing in terms of getting English out there and giving the experience to the learner and moving it into a learner-centered experience. Okay, that's something I'm going to talk about in a moment. I've done everything from taking students to karaoke to trying to get English on toilet paper. And I'm still working on that one. I haven't quite got it there yet, but you may just find it one of these days. English phrases on toilet paper would be, you've got nothing else to do while you're sitting there. Learn a little English. All right? Why am I telling you this? Okay. Because materials development can and should go far beyond the making of classroom exercises and homework assignments. It is not only what we do for our students inside the classroom, it is the providing of opportunities for students to learn both inside and outside the classroom, with activities that both engage and stimulate our students, but also that move more of those opportunities for the learners to engage in at their own pace. The move to a learner-centered approach. I'm going to take you through a little bit of terminology today. For some of you, this will be fairly easy. You've probably learned this before. For some of you, this might be new. So please bear with me as we go through this. A teacher-centered versus a learner-centered approach. Okay? A teacher-centered approach is simply one where the majority of the interaction in the classroom is directed by the teacher. A classroom lecture on a historical event, for example. The teacher speaks for 75 minutes, and the class is finished. Okay, it's very teacher-centered. A learner-centered approach is where teacher talk is more limited, allowing for the maximum amount of time for student interaction between the students and between the students and the teacher and between the students and themselves. And why we want to increase learner-centeredness? Because it increases production. And at my university, at Otaru University of Commerce, when we're doing teacher training, we're always stressing the move to production and trying to make each activity as productive as possible for our students, given the time constraints and given the other concerns that we have in the classroom. And that brings up a question. What are the two parts of learning in language study? What are the two parts? Okay. Can anyone tell me what the two parts of language learning are? What we ask our students to do? The first part they're really, really good at. The second part, not so much. Yes?
Memorizing and understanding?
Yes. The first thing we ask them to do is memorize and understand. And they're quite good at that. They like to memorize things. Okay? When I first came to Japan in the early 1990s, I used to see students everywhere with those little key holders that they flip with vocabulary on them. The vocabulary key holders. And what did they do with it? They were standing on the subway, standing on the train. I even tried to do this with kanji. I failed. And I'm certain that most of the students who are using those key rings didn't gain very much either, unfortunately. And you still see them sometimes, you can still buy them at the Hyakuren stores. They do have some use, but only up to a limited extent. And there's one of them right there. Students spend a great deal of time memorizing vocabulary, memorizing grammar, memorizing dialogues. And then what happens? They stop. They stop, right? All right? They'll spend all that time studying, and then they stop. Or they get to their entrance exam, and they stop. Okay? Whatever there is that they're doing it for, they get there, and they stop. They stop believing that is enough. Memorization alone is not enough. You know that. I know that. The students probably inherently know that. But that's what they've been accustomed to, is memorization. And we want to take them beyond that. So what's the second step? Production. It's using the language. And we want them to use the language. The second part is simply using it. If you memorize it and you don't use it, it's muri. Right? All right? You can maybe work your way through a newspaper article. Good. But you can't have a conversation. You can't get things done that you're trying to get done unless you use it. And so I like to spend a lot of my time encouraging my students to get out there and use it. And that's part of the reason I do all of this stuff, is to give them opportunities to look at English in a different way. Right? So much of the student experience with English is bad. They tell us that. By the time they get to my level, by the time they get to university, a lot of them don't like English. And I'm sure by the time they get to you guys, they don't like English. All right? We have to, at some point, try to repair that. And we have to be willing to engage the students directly and encourage them to learn. And in some cases, we have to reinvent the wheel with them, show them a new way. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my students. So, how do we get students to use the language? When outside of the classroom, we have very little control over what they're doing. We can control what goes on inside the classroom by making small changes to the activities that we do and moving them to a more productive experience inside the classroom. We'll talk about this more, but we've got to get through a few basic vocabulary items first. Okay? You see the passive skills and the active skills down below. I'm sure this is common knowledge to most of you. Listening and reading are fairly passive. Why? Because students can do it on their own. They don't need anyone to interact with to be able to do that. That's why those are passive. Speaking and writing, generally you're speaking to someone else, unless you're talking to yourself. You're writing with a purpose. We hope. So those will be active. The key point. Even the passive skills and the exercises can be made more active. It's passive. Listening to an iPod by yourself. We see this all the time. We see our students doing it. Possibly if they're on their way to school, you see them with their headphones on. They're involved in their own experience. They're making that active. Listen to a song again and again. Learn the song. Go to karaoke and sing it. Okay? I've always encouraged my students to go to karaoke. I quite like it. And I like it because it works on your pronunciation, works on your fluency. There's a lot of good. And you're having a damn good time while you're doing it. Okay? It's these kinds of experiences that we give to our students. I'm not suggesting that you take your classes and go off to karaoke. I'm suggesting that you encourage your students to look at it as an opportunity. Okay? Well, karaoke has become somewhat out of fashion, but if you have students who are interested in that kind of thing, who are interested in pop music, encourage them to learn song. All right? Memorize it, sing it. Same with a newspaper article. It's very passive to read a newspaper article, but it's not passive if you have the students reading it and responding to it. And many of you know the Japan Today website, right? Okay, Japan Today. What's good about Japan Today's website? Well, it's in English. The articles are quite short. And you get a lot of people responding to them, right? You get a lot of garbage. You get a lot of people writing nasty stuff and things. But the idea is actually quite a good pedagogical idea. Okay, you got people writing, reading, responding right there to very short little pieces of text. And I quite often like to use that model when I'm creating materials for my students. Okay, taking something from the textbook and either altering it or changing it in a slight way to make it so that the students have to respond. And they respond to each other, they respond to the teacher, they respond to everything that's presented to them. And that makes it a more active experience. Now, a word or 10,000 on grammar and grammar translation. Okay? I won't go in great detail about my thoughts on grammar translation. I'm sure by the end of this presentation you'll be able to quite well figure out what I'm thinking. But I do need to take you through some terminology. Who's this? That's Chomsky. Have you read Chomsky? Yes. Really? Yes. Do you like it? Okay. Is that the Tatemae or the Honmei? All right. Yes, that's Chomsky. All right. And Chomsky gave us grammaticality and acceptability. All right. Grammaticality, quite simply, break it down into its bare minimum, is it grammatical in utterance? Is something someone says grammatical? Is a sentence grammatical? Acceptability is that sentence acceptable to a native speaker? Okay. And what Chomsky showed was that grammaticality and acceptability are separate from one another. What's the famous sentence?
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Yes, thank you. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. All right? Is it grammatical? Yes. Yes. There's nothing strange about colorless green ideas sleep furiously. All right? There's the grammar for it. You've got a pair of adjectives, a noun, a verb, and an adverb. They all fit in the right proper places. The adjectives are in the right order. And you've got it. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Is it grammatical? Yes. Is it acceptable to a native speaker? No. Although some native speakers will try to put an interpretation to it now because it's been around for so long. So we have grammaticality and we have acceptability. And that brings us to a second consideration that we need to know about. Which is prescriptivism and descriptivism. All right? And I like to teach these together. I like to teach grammaticality and acceptability and prescriptivism and descriptivism together because they affect us in the classroom regularly. And they will affect your interactions with others, and they will affect how you explain the language to others and the approach that you take towards language. And let me show you why. Okay, prescriptivism. The language as it is supposed to be used according to the rules. Okay? Prescriptive rules in English, for example, tell us that we shouldn't use double negatives. That we shouldn't use ain't. Prescriptive rule of grammar. Okay? How many of you use ain't? How many of you use double negatives? That tells me something right there. Okay? A prescriptivist, which we will find that many of our colleagues are prescriptivists. Prescriptivists will tell us, Sensei, you can't do that. Okay. The descriptivist looks at what native speakers actually do with the language. Okay. Descriptivists know, however, that we use ain't, and we use double negatives. And we violate a lot of rules. Why do we do that? Because language is messy and is continuously changing. Right? So how do we explain this to our students? When they come to us and they say, Sensei, you said this. My grammar book says this. What do? Any suggestions? Anybody?
Both are right.
They're both right.
Yeah.
Depends on the context.
There you go. Depends on the context.
I usually bring up the use of job.
Okay.
Like jane versus sayonara or something like that. I'll relate it back to Japanese, which is saying what you write are not always the same thing.
Okay, relating back to Japanese is an interesting way of approaching it, in a bad way, yeah. I think it depends on context a lot, okay? And we know that the students need to pass their tests. And I like to explain it to my students sometimes in this way, okay? I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing this. One is the grammatical way. One is the way that your textbook says to do it. That's what you need for a test. If you have a test, use it. On the other hand, if you're with your friends, if you're making friends, and you want to sound like a native speaker, you want to be more natural, you might want to do it this way. And that's when we get into the pronunciation things of gonna, have to, gotta, wanna, have to, all that stuff. We do all the short forms. Okay? When you're on a test, when you're doing a writing test, don't do that. When you're speaking with your friends, do that. Okay? I mention this because you need to be aware of this, aware of both for your sanity. Okay? Because the longer you stay in Japan, the more people are going to come to you and tell you you're doing it wrong. Okay? I still get professors coming to me and saying to me, Clanky Sensei, you're wrong. Why? Because my book says you're wrong. Who wrote your book? And usually what happens is it ends up being a back and forth between me and the other professor in a form of jousting where I go to Google and I Google up several examples of it in use. And I present it to the professor, and the professor quietly walks away. And that point of grammar usually does not come up again. For your sanity, be able to explain this to people, the difference between grammaticality and acceptability and prescriptivism and descriptivism. It'll save you a lot of headaches and a lot of hassles. I recommend it very, very strongly. Okay? Our textbooks tend to be prescriptive, but they don't have to be. And when you're examining your textbooks and when you're looking at your textbooks and you're looking at your materials, look at them with a little bit of a careful eye to see if they're being done in a prescriptive way or if they're being done in a more descriptive way. And that's good for you to know, that's good for the other teacher, if you're team teaching, that's good for the other teacher to know, and you can adjust accordingly in what you're doing, depending on whether you believe you should be more prescriptive or be more descriptive, based upon what the goal is that you're working towards with those students. Okay? Now, grammar translation. You like grammar translation? Why don't you like grammar translation? It's terrible. Why?
It doesn't take into consideration the whole uses of the language.
Anybody? Yeah.
Well, it's also, it's
L2 because they know, hey, the L1's coming, I'll be okay.
Yes, there are reliance on the L1. And because we're in such a large room, if you're going to comment, please comment loudly so that everybody can hear you. Yep.
Because I had a parent call me out on this
How so?
on Saturday, that I looked very bored in class when she visited because we're doing a grammar translation game.
Okay, and she thought you should be more excited about it?
Yeah, she didn't really exactly think that I was a great teacher until we explained what was happening.
Okay.
That this was a class about this particular day, grammar translation and recitation. It wasn't the games that we normally play, it wasn't the fun, it wasn't me helping the students.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else want to say something? Okay. Yeah.
It's better if you make it fun. I've discovered that just reading aloud in sunshine at my middle school, that if you act it out, it makes it more entertaining for the kids and it helps them remember it more. So when you translate it, to also do the same sort of thing, not to approach it as, oh, this is just boring, but to try and approach it from a different standpoint than from what the student is immediately thinking when they think, oh, grammar translation, yuck. But to sort of add more energy to it, and it adds more energy to it from the kids as well.
Great. Yeah, you're doing exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Grammar translation also tends to have a problem where then it reinforces the fact that they shouldn't take risks because it must be right.
Bingo. All right, I was hoping somebody was going to key in on this point. All right, because among its many deficiencies, its reliance on the L1, back translation is a hindrance to thinking in the L2, which is one of my goals. One of my big goals is to get students to think in the L2, all right, in the target language. Its goal is accuracy, and that is the problem, okay, that I see with it. Because what happens if they rely on accuracy? Then students, they naturally become very passive, they go backwards, and they say, I'm not going to say anything unless I'm sure I'm right. And then what happens? They continue to go through the system. That way they're not producing language, they're back translating, all right? When I see them, I can see the students who've come through with full grammar translation, all right? It takes them longer to respond because they have to take what I'm saying to them, they have to revert it back into Japanese in their head, they have to think of a proper answer, and they have to convert it back into English again. And hope that it comes out, A, in the right order, and B, with some kind of understanding, okay? And we get this all the time. So I basically have to take the students back again. And I have to convince them that mistakes are an important part of the learning process, and they not only shouldn't be afraid of them, because it's only going to make them better by making the mistakes and overcoming those mistakes. All right? It's how bad is the problem? I've had to include it as a subject in my textbooks. This is chapter 1 from one of my textbooks, the importance of making mistakes. All right? And I'm getting them after you guys. Okay? So they come through the system and they come up to me. And I get them in classes, and in the first year class, I have to start with this in week 1, the importance of making mistakes. And I blame this on grammar translation, quite frankly. All right? It's a system that is slowly changing, and we hope that it will continue to change over time. There are still people who are quite convinced that it's an effective methodology for the teaching of English. I'll leave you to your own decision about that. Okay, you can make your own decision about that. But the argument that sometimes is made is that one effective, successful speaker as a result of grammar translation does not account for 10,000 who don't. Something to think about. Okay. The importance of moving towards teaching in English. Okay. The ministry for a long time has been asking for schools to slowly start moving towards classes all in English. Okay. How many of your classes are all in English, completely in English? Okay. How many of it's about 70% English? How many of you are less than 50% in English? That's very telling, all right? Let's do that again. All in English. Look around at the people. How many are all in English? How many are 70% English? How many are less than 50% English? Which one has the most? Less than 50% in English, right? And this is in spite of the fact that the quote at the bottom is from 2009. The ministry has been asking for years for the classes to, at least at the high school level, to start moving into all English classes. I took this was one of the first things that came up off the Japan Times archive. January 12, 2009, English taught in English. New teaching guidelines released by the education ministry call for high school English to be taught primarily in English from when? From 2 years ago. Are we getting there? Slowly. Change takes time. And as ALTs, the more that you can do to encourage that slow push, maybe you're helping out the next group coming in. Maybe you're helping out the students as much as possible. You can't expect complete change overnight. It's not going to come. It's going to take time. It's still continuing to take time. There are still many people who believe that grammar translation is the way to go. And this is not a complete rant on grammar translation, but rather they do it with the best intentions. And I say that because many of the people who are responsible for teaching grammar translation believe that they're doing the best for their students. That's the honest fact about it. And they believe that because some of the entrance exams contain translation questions, that we have to teach that way. Okay? Now, this comes right into my area because I'm at a university, and we are one of those universities that students strive to get into. And therefore, entrance exams are quite important. And what we do on our entrance exams has an impact. So what my job is to encourage my colleagues at other universities, particularly around Sapporo, to change their entrance exams so that translation questions no longer exist. And to move to tests that are English only, even the instructions, page numbers, everything. It's an English test. Make it an English test. And moving towards a system where we make it evident to the high schools, to the jukus, to the yobikos, to the prep schools, to everyone that we expect production. And that we want production. Okay. Now, if you've ever seen the entrance exams for Shodai, for example, the entrance exam has no Japanese on it. It's an all-English test. It's a production test. And we're doing our part. Okay. What's that called, where we are influencing the level below us, or the levels below us, by the activities we do in the classroom? No. What's it called?
Scaffolding? Trickle down?
No. Good, I found a vocabulary word somebody doesn't know. It's called the washback effect. Okay? The things we're doing in the classroom, positive or negatively, that have an impact on the levels below us. Okay? So what I do at the university level doesn't directly have an impact on the high schools unless it's involved with the entrance exam. And what you guys do in high schools has an impact on what goes on at the junior high schools. And it goes through the process like that. It can be a positive washback effect, or it can be a negative washback effect. Negative washback is what happens when you put grammar translation on your entrance exam in university. See how this works? And it starts going backwards. Okay? So, if Hokkaido, for example, still has grammar translation on their entrance exam, then there are going to be a lot of high schools and a lot of jukus and a lot of yobikos that are going to say, hey, but that's what's on their entrance exam. And that's what we're teaching for. We want our students, we want the best for our students. So, I've got to teach grammar translation for my students so that they have a chance of getting into Hokkaido. Hokkaido has been the biggest challenge to get them to change. Their entrance exam is quite conservative if you look at it. It's unfortunate. Okay. Let me have a moment to take a break. I'm a little bit dry from the jet lag. Now, getting back to textbooks again, okay? As I mentioned to you at the beginning of this talk today, that textbooks are the great compromise. Okay. Do you like the textbooks in your classes?
No.
Are they boring?
Yes. I actually like mine.
You like your textbook?
I don't know. I know they were teaching from before.
Okay. Okay. You want to say something? Yeah.
Sorry, I tend to ask a lot of questions, so excuse me. Anyways, so I don't know if this should wait or not, but I'm curious, what would it take to actually change a high-level university like Hokkaido in their method? You know, what would people higher up need to realise that they actually change that to a production test?
You mean the entrance exam?
Yeah.
Okay, first thank you for your question. It's quite a good question. I worked at Hokkaido for 4 years, okay, and I was involved with their entrance exam. I can say that now because it's been 15 years since I worked there. When I worked at Hokkaido, I fought and fought and fought and fought to get their entrance exam down to a single question. A single grammar translation question. It was the big compromise, like I talk about here. Okay? And I had gotten it down to a single question after fighting and fighting and fighting with very conservative literature professors who are all retired now. I went back and looked at Hokkaido's exam a couple years ago, and it had gone backwards, and they had gone back up to a full section on grammar translation. What would it take? It takes teachers who are willing to stand up and say, we can do better, and we need to do better for our students, and here are the reasons why. And that's a two-part street, because you have to have professors on the other side who are willing to do something a little bit different and willing to take that risk. One of the biggest complaints that I heard when I was at Hokkaido, and again, I'm not telling you anything that's going to get me in trouble because I'm talking about Hokkaido, and I don't teach for Hokkaido anymore. Okay? One of the biggest complaints that I heard at Hokkaido was, well, if we change the system, then the jukus and the yobikos and the high school teachers are going to call us on the telephone because they've been teaching a certain way, and they're going to complain to us. In other words, the faculty were afraid of getting telephone calls. And what I said to them, and I remember the gentleman now who said it to me, unfortunately he passed away a few years ago. But I remember what I said to him. I said, here's my telephone number, they can call me. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, because if they call me, they're going to have to speak English. And if they speak English, their argument might not hold up as well. Okay? And the second thing is because I got the argument against whatever they're going to say to me, okay, if they want to complain about it. And my argument back to the professor, besides giving him my telephone number, was to simply say, the research is on our side, and we're the university, and we have a responsibility to try to accurately test our students, those coming in. And in order to do that, we need to be able to make changes where we see deficiencies in our exam. Now you have to remember, if any of you had background in testing pedagogy, you'll understand validity and reliability concerns that come with the entrance exams, okay? We're not allowed to do things like piloting. We're not allowed to do things like after evaluation to make sure that each question is accurately represented. So we have a responsibility to our students, and we have a responsibility to create a positive washback effect downward if we want to change the system. I'm sorry that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I hope that sort of, did I sort of get
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk to you about it afterward, but yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, as I was mentioning about the textbooks are a compromise between the authors, the publishers, and the language teaching community. The authors try to be innovative. The publishers are conservative. The teachers who are using them are sometimes conservative. Okay. What do teachers want when they get a textbook? They want ease of use. All right? If they're interested in a learner-centered approach, they want to push that learning experience onto the students as much as possible, not in a negative way, but sort of encourage the students to take more responsibility in their learning. They don't want the books to be difficult. The students, on their side, they don't want the books to be difficult. Right? If the book's too difficult, they find trouble with it. Your textbooks are probably ministry-approved texts, those designed by a committee, and you will likely need to supplement them. Okay? How many of you are supplementing your textbooks? How many of you are making your own materials? How many of you are using materials that the ALT before you brought to the system? Okay. I asked that question because I hope that you guys, after you complete your terms, will leave behind a few things that might be beneficial to the next ones coming in. How many of you wish you had materials that previous ALTs had left for you? Okay, of things that worked great, yeah. Okay, so I would encourage you very strongly to consider doing that. And consider doing that particularly for the things that work out really well. So you're not always reinventing the wheel. And I know from experience of coming into new schools and looking over what is available and what's not available and wishing that there had been things available so I don't have to create everything. Like most of you, I take my good assignments and I keep them. The ones that don't work, I get rid of them, or I change them. But I'm always collecting them. And that is another thing I would like to encourage you to do, is I would like to encourage you to collect these things and keep track of them. It's easy to lose files on a computer. I can't tell you how many files, book manuscripts, I have lost when I changed computers and I forgot where I put the file. Okay? It's quite a lot of work. And so I would encourage you to save those. And save them because you know your students. The ALTs coming in won't know your students. Some of these activities will benefit them and make their life easier. And you're doing a service to your school and to the students who attend your school. Now, I mentioned teaching for tests. One of the reasons that grammar translation is so tenacious in the system here is that because people are teaching for the tests, for the entrance exams. And I told you how we can counter that. We can counter that through positive washback, okay? Particularly on my side. An often heard line in the teaching of students, particularly at the high school level, is that teachers have to prepare the students for the entrance exams. And because those entrance exams are perceived as grammar translation, we have to teach grammar translation. If that is, how many of you have heard that before? Yeah. Okay. A closer look at the entrance exams throughout Hokkaido, if you're interested in those things. Most of the entrance exams are fairly easily available for the past year, for the past 5 years. You can go and take a look at them. And I would encourage you to take a look at them. Particularly for the schools that your students are going to be applying to, if you know which schools your students tend to apply to. Same goes for junior high school teachers who have students wanting to go to particular high schools. Same thing. Look at what they're doing. Okay? And look with a critical eye, and look at each of the activities that are on the entrance exam, and say, what is this doing? What is the goal? What is that high school or what is that university trying to achieve? Why are they testing the students on this? Is it a productive exercise? Is it a passive exercise? Is it something simple like true-false, or is it reading comprehension, or is it something productive that asks the students to actually produce language? I see that as ammunition, as a way of getting things to move, small changes. Okay. And of course, I mentioned the washback effect already, the effect positive or negative, that what a higher level does affects the lower level beyond it, below it. So building productive activities. Okay, I realize we're in the after lunch period right now, and you're probably having your sugar rush and getting a little bit sleepy right now. Bear with me as we go through this, and I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. I'm going to take you through the 4 skills again very quickly, and looking at how we can make them even more productive. Okay, first with reading. Generally considered a passive skill because it can be done by oneself. In school, outside of school. Do you ever see your students reading outside of school? A few people? Anything other than manga? Are they reading anything other than their smartphone? Good. Okay. How can we make reading more productive? All right. A passive approach and a teacher-centered one. Students read, teacher explains. You might remember this from your high school literature classes, if your classes were quite passive. Okay. If we want to make it productive, we can do all kinds of things with reading. Okay. Reading is fundamental. Students read and respond, they read and discuss, read and write, read and solve, read and continue the story, read and write the ending, read and make something like a recipe, and many, many more. It's reading +1. Reading comprehension questions are okay, but they're often quite thoughtless. Okay? Read, answer, read, answer, read, answer. Yeah.
correctly, you can use like extension questions and stuff to make it slightly less narrow.
Yes, you're right, and I was just going to make that point. Thank you. Yes, students are accustomed to regular reading comprehension questions. They're accustomed to read, answer, read, answer. They've been trained that their whole life. So what we try to do, and what I try to do in my textbooks, is if there are 5 reading comprehension questions, the first 3 are read and answer, the 4th one extends it a little bit, and the 5th one is an open-ended question that they have to respond to. That's one way to do it. And why is it 5 in the textbooks? Often it's 5. Why? Because that's what textbooks have traditionally done. And if you're going to make changes to them, you make the changes slowly. So if you want an open-ended question, you put it as question number 5. If you want 2 open-ended questions, you're probably still safe. If you do 3 or more, your textbook publisher is going to get angry. Small changes, big compromises. True, false, and multiple choice questions are not productive unless they are made so. Okay. Your textbooks have true, false? Yes. Your textbooks have multiple choice? Yes. Why? It's easy to grade, yes. We as teachers, do we like things that are easy to grade? Do you like things that are hard to grade? Sometimes? Okay. You're starting to see the pattern, okay? There are reasons why every activity is included in a textbook. Sometimes it's for efficiency. Sometimes it's for time management. Sometimes it's easy to grade. But what I want you to think about as teachers is I want you to think about why that exercise is there and what that activity is doing, and is it really benefiting my students to do that activity? Or is there a way that I can change that activity to make it slightly more useful for our students? Does that make sense? Good. For example, true, false. Do you like doing true, false? I hate doing true, false. It's boring. And every textbook I work with has to do it. And every textbook publisher I work with asks me to put in true, false. And I don't like true, false. Because it's boring. It's boring for the students, it's boring for me. It comes usually midway through a chapter to 3/4 of the way through a chapter when the students are already tired. So how can we make this more productive? It's quite easy, actually. Take your true, false questions. Turn them into error analysis questions. Okay? You're going to have a certain number of false answers. Take the false questions and ask the students to turn them into correct sentences. Now they have to respond to it in terms of true, false. They have to think through the problem. If it's false, okay, why is it false? And they have to correct it. And make it correct. Okay. If you're doing a set of 5 true, false, maybe 2 of them or 3 of them are going to be false. Okay? It's certainly more productive than a straight 5 true, false. Okay? This is an easy way to turn boring true, false questions into something that makes the students think and respond to it. Okay? A productive activity. If you have particularly good students, if you're fortunate, and you have students who can speak reasonably well, then you can turn this into a speaking exercise and have them do it automatically. Why is it wrong? And have them talk about it. Okay? If you're not that fortunate, allow your students to do it on a piece of paper, and then they can talk about it if they want or if you have time. Listening. Okay. Listening, like reading, can be very passive. It's done on one's own with one's earphones. Anywhere to block out the rest of the universe. And it's quite easy to make that productive. It's passive. Dictation. How many of you do dictation? A few of you? Quite a lot of you do dictation. Okay. Much of language lab listening, if you have a language lab, many of you still have that. Listening at home. Make it productive. Listen and summarize. For example, the news. Listen and summarize. What did you just hear? If your students are capable of that. Even news at a lower level. Listen and respond. Telephone calls. Listen and repeat, and then use new vocabulary and grammar. Listen and mimic. Shadowing. Okay. You know what shadowing is? You shadow?
Yeah.
Okay. My co-author, I do most of my books with a co-author, a Japanese co-author. He loves shadowing. He loves having his students do. When I walk into his classroom, when I walk past his classroom, they're always shadowing. Okay. And listen and act. Situational role playing. Okay. Those are all productive ways of dealing with basically the same thing. Okay. And of course, listening brings up music, which brings up all kinds of wonderful topics and things that you can do with the students. Or at least you can encourage the students to do that. Speaking is self-explanatory. Speak. In a learner-centered class, the vast majority of the class will be using the language in one form or another. If you find the classes are very teacher-centered, okay, and if you're doing grammar translation and you're doing, and as I asked before, if less than 50% of your class is in English, it's probably going to be a teacher-centered class, I'm guessing. I would encourage you to think about it in percentage terms. I would encourage each of you to think about the percentage of English that's being used in the class right now. Try to make small moves. If you up that by 5% or 10%, is it possible? Is it possible to up it 15%? You probably can't change the entire thing, but can you increase it marginally or gradually to make the class more productive and more English-based? What percentage of the class am I doing in English? Or am I and the Japanese teacher of English doing it in English? And what percent are the students producing language? How much of the time are the students producing English? Is it 5%? 10%? 50%? We all know the students in the class who are really, really, really gung-ho about English and who really, really want to do English all the time. We love those students. But what's the average? Do you ever think about that? I would encourage you to think about it. And think about it at the beginning of the semester, think about it at the end of the semester. Did I improve on that? Right? Did I improve on that amount of English usage? We only have a limited amount of time in our classes. We have to manage that time carefully. The expectations on us to perform a certain way in the classroom might be stopping us. But we need to slowly try to change that, try to move it. Okay? Even if it's only marginally. If your students are not speaking, then you may want to talk to them about the importance of not being afraid to make mistakes. Okay, back to what I mentioned before. Okay. Some students are naturally shy. We know that. We get the reasons from our students all the time. Some students hate English. I don't take it personally when they say, I hate English. Yeah? Well, I hate natto. But occasionally I'll still eat a little bit of it. Okay? And it's unfortunate because my birthday is natto no hi. I see a question at the back.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There you go. So you emphasise the importance of making mistakes. I mean, I get it. Through making mistakes, you learn what your weaknesses are and you can improve upon it as a result. But how would you explain that to a 13-year-old who basically comes to class and has mates and doesn't want to feel like an idiot in front of them? How would you explain to them the importance of making mistakes, gaining something from a mistake as opposed to losing, say, face possibly with their friends?
Are you talking about one student or a lot of students?
Quite a few students I've
Okay.
noticed just are afraid to speak. They're afraid of being wrong, and they're afraid of, like some kids just are afraid of looking like a fool in front of them, because they usually make fun of them.
Well, everybody does.
Japanese stuff.
It's face threatening. It's face threatening for them. Do you speak Japanese?
Yeah, pretty well.
Okay. Do you make mistakes in Japanese?
Yeah.
Show them. Talk to them in Japanese. Okay? If you have a chance to see those kids outside of class, have a conversation with them in Japanese. Make a few mistakes. Even if you're creating the mistakes, make a mistake.
Yeah,
And show them. That's kind of how I go about doing it. Okay, that thing I showed you for Hokkaido Shimbun, I would encourage you to watch it. Okay, watch it because my Japanese is pretty bad. Okay, I do the English, but they also have the unedited cut, which is me making mistakes in Japanese. And they left it in there for a reason. They left it in there to show people that it's okay to make mistakes and stop worrying so much. Now, 13-year-olds, difficult age. All right? But if they see, hopefully they have some respect for their teachers, if they see someone making a mistake and saying, I made a mistake. By the way, there's a mistake in the slides here. You'll see a mistake at some point because I noticed it this morning and I had already sent my thing in. I make mistakes. We all make mistakes. And my university students, I do this with sometimes. I'll switch into Japanese. And within a few sentences, I'll have a breakdown somewhere and I'll mess up a word or something. And I'll say, see, I don't care. And I tell my students, the most important thing for me, aite o rikai saseru, to make the other person understand. If you can make the other person understand, then those mistakes mean nothing. It's only when you have a communicative breakdown that the mistakes come into play. And I have this talk with my students, usually the first class of every semester, when I get new students. Now, 13-year-olds, I'm not an expert on 13-year-olds, but my guess is that the same principle works, of showing them that it's okay to make mistakes by you making a mistake. And when I'm explaining English, often, when I'm explaining English in my classes, if I'm explaining a grammar point or something, I'll make a mistake on the board. And I'll hope that someone catches it. And then I'll say, look, I made a mistake too, but I don't care. I corrected it, and I went on. And that's probably the best advice I can give you for that. Okay? So if you have a chance to take a look at the Hokkaido Shimbun ones, you'll see me really messing up Japanese on camera, and it's all over Shiribeshi. Writing. Like speaking, it's a productive activity, and it's strange because often we see speaking and listening put together. But the natural pairing, at least in the classroom, is often speaking and writing, the two productive skills. Okay? And sometimes I suggest textbooks that sort of focus on these two productive skills, and the textbook publishers kind of look at me like I'm a little strange. Okay? Listening, it's taken for granted that listening is going to go with speaking. And this is true. But the other productive skill is writing. Sorry, it says productive. Write a paragraph and hand it in as homework. Yes, that's productive. But it's kind of boring. More productive. Write a paragraph about a problem in your town. Exchange with a classmate. And write a one-paragraph response to your classmate's problem. Okay. It's something that kids can engage in. They can do it at the university level, they can do it at high school, they can probably If they're reasonably good at junior high school level, they might be able to get out of a couple sentences. Okay? They know what the problems are. You're letting them have the open-ended side of it. Take a problem, write about it. What's a problem in your town? Okay? Exchange that with a classmate. Okay? Pair work. In a one-paragraph response. Okay? Doesn't take that long to do. And again, they don't have to be perfect. You're going to have to tell students, you don't have to be perfect on this. It's okay to make a mistake. The importance is getting the ideas down and getting the other person to understand them and respond to them. Okay? What does this do? This gets the students vested in the topic. It's about their town, something they care about. Okay? It's much more interesting than some abstract topic that's in the textbook. Okay? And as much as I like to think that students enjoy my topics that I pick for the textbooks, I know I don't always get it right. Okay? And over time, those topics change. Some grow stronger and some become weaker. And you have to pick and choose which ones are going to work best for you. Sometimes we can supplement them. You might be doing a chapter on something in society. Well, what's better in society than taking them back to a thought of their town? Okay? We do the typical things all the time. We do family, we do pets, we do friends, we do, interests and stuff like that. But this takes it a little bit further, I think. Grammar and vocabulary. Use it, 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 use it. I put it 11 times. Does anyone know why? Yes. Okay? It means use it. I took 11 times because when I was a graduate student, way back when, the research at that time, when I was doing my MA in what was EFL at that time, it's now TESOL, was that for you to retain a vocabulary word and to be able to use it required at least 11 opportunities to use it. Okay? In other words, you needed to practice each vocabulary item at least, skunakutomo, at least 11 times, so you could retain it and reproduce it accurately. I don't know if the research is the same thing now, but it's something that has stuck with me for a very long time. And I still encourage people to do it because it doesn't matter if it's 11 times or 8 times or 20 times, it just means do it. All right? I hope that when you guys are learning Japanese, you're doing the same thing. You're applying the same skills. And saying, okay, here's a new kanji. Write it, write it, write it, write it, write it, write it, write it. You have to do it 50 times or 100 times to be able to get that to stick in your head so that you can reproduce it again. You could probably read it after 10 times. Okay? But I put 11 up there because it's a mnemonic device that helps me remember to say that you should do it at least 11 times. Okay? As I noted earlier, the biggest problem our students have is that they memorize the vocabulary and then they walk out of the classroom and they come back next week and they look at you like they never saw that word before. And you say, what? I just talked about that last week. Well, a lot happens between last week and this week. So you have to find a way to get them to use it as many times as possible. Same with grammar. Perhaps even more so with grammar because of the natural complexity of it. All right? Some grammar, it's easy to pick up for students. Some it's going to be quite difficult. 20 years in Japan, I still have trouble with nakereba ikenai, nakereba, all those. I still have trouble with it. I have to practice and practice and practice and practice. And I tell myself this, you idiot. Practice, 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 but I use avoidance. And I'll go around it. I know it's coming, must is coming. Okay. I know nakereba naranai, that's easy. Nakereba ikenai is a little bit different. Nakereba also. Okay. Our students are having the same problem. And they need to practice it again and again, and they need to see that it's right. They need that confirmation check. Did I get it right? A passive example, fill in the blanks. Does your textbook have fill in the blanks? Yes. Yeah, fill in the blanks. Some of my textbooks have fill in the blanks, unfortunately, sometimes. Make it productive. Take the vocabulary rather than putting in the blank. Take the same vocabulary and ask the students to use it in a sentence. Just give them the vocabulary word, say, try to use this in a sentence. Because you solve two problems with one activity. You solve the problem of comprehension. Do they understand it semantically? Because if they're using it correctly in a sentence, 9 times out of 10 they're using it correctly because they understand it. And then they're producing it. That's 10 times better than fill in the blank. But, as I said to you before, you have to understand why fill in the blank is there. Fill in the blank is there because that's the compromise. It's there because teachers expect it to be there. It's there because publishers want it to be there. Not necessarily because the authors want it to be there. So if you have fill in the blanks, you might want to take those vocabulary out of the fill in the blanks and ask them to use it in a sentence. Use the grammar in a sentence. Either orally, you can call on students, write it down, do it as homework, somehow. But you've got to get them to express it, and to use that vocabulary, and to use that grammar. Or it's muddy. All right. I've come to a bit of an exercise. I'll give you a little bit of a break. All right. On the 3rd page of your handout, you have an exercise at the top. It says 5 minutes. We may go a little more than 5 minutes, but it says, how would you make the following more productive? Okay, I gave you a couple of them already, true, false, you already have. But take 5 minutes, and I want you to think about how you would make each of these exercises, true, false, close exercises, matching, reading, grammar, and dictation, how you would make them slightly more productive. Okay? That's the first step. The first step is do it. The second step is apply it, which means share your answers with the person next to you. All right? So 5 minutes to think about it, 5 minutes to share your answers with the person next to you. So that'll be 10 minutes. Go. You've had a little bit of time to think about this, and I've walked around and I enjoyed talking to some of you. Very quickly, I'll take this through. Normally, I would spend time with more interaction, but I know we're going to run short of time if I do that, and I won't get to the second activity. True, false, of course, we talked about that. One way is to change it in error analysis. Close exercises, as I mentioned, I didn't realize that some of you didn't know what a close was. Close exercise is a piece of text. It's like the text that is the main section of your textbook. And then every 7th word or every 10th word is pulled out, and the students have to replace those words. It's a read comprehension exercise. You can change that by taking those vocabulary, and instead of going every 7th word or every 10th word, you can pick specific vocabulary out, have the students replace those vocabulary, and then have the students, as a separate small exercise, use those in a sentence, for example. Matching exercises are quite dull. They're basically filler exercises in textbooks. Matching exercises, again, it's usually vocabulary and meaning. So vocabulary, meaning, use it in a sentence. Reading, all the things we talked about before. Read and solve, read and do, read and make, read and decide, read and solve. Grammar, use it, use it, use it, use it, use it. Dictation, get rid of it. Is teacher-centered. Dictation turned into a conversation. Have one student read something, have the other student dictate it, and go back and forth is one way to do it. You can do lots of things. It's basically a listening exercise that you just have to make more productive. Okay? I like putting a little break in there. It's a good point to have a little break and to think about these things. What you would do with them. Because these are typical things that we see in our textbooks. Now, encouraging students to think in the L2. I mentioned this earlier. What's the big problem we encounter if we try to encourage our students to think in the L2? Resistance?
They just don't want it. They don't want it.
I don't wanna. Resistance, kakume, revolution. When she said resistance, the Japanese word popped into my mind, which is kakume, which is revolution. There is certainly some resistance to it, but I don't see that much of it. What I see generally is that, quite simply, people don't know how. If you're dealing with your L2, and you've never learned to think in a foreign language before, you have no clue what you're doing. You have to kind of explain it to them. If it's your L3 or L4, no problem. You've probably figured it out for yourself by now how to do it. But for students learning their L2, they're not going to have a clue. Now, I was quite lucky when I was in high school because I had a really, really good French teacher. And my French teacher gave me a piece of advice, and it worked. Now, this isn't going to work for everybody, but it'll work for some people. And it sort of flips on the light switch. What my French teacher told me to do was, she said, when you're by yourself, you're in your room by yourself, or you're taking a walk by yourself, start naming everything in the L2. For me, it was start naming everything in French. Okay? So everything in my room, I was looking at the mirror, the outlet, the book, learn how to say everything. Just say it. Okay? When you're walking down the street, describe what's happening in your mind. Start describing it. Okay? What's happening? Okay, there's a man crossing the street. Okay? There's a squirrel that ran by. There's this and this and this and this. And she said, if you do that again and again and again and again, after about 3 weeks, you'll start doing it naturally. And she was right. I became quite fluent in French when I was studying in high school. And I applied the same techniques to Japanese. When I speak Japanese, I think in Japanese. When I speak French, I think in French. And it's much faster. It's like flipping on and off a light switch. But you have to have some kind of knowledge of how the light switch works. And you have to be able to compartmentalize those things so that you can be able to do it. Right? I mentioned to you the advantages before of not having to translate back into Japanese. The advantages are increases fluency and speed. It's more natural. And it stops the reliance on translation. Okay? Because what's the second step of that? We teach students, and we do this naturally. We teach students that if you don't know the word for something, what do you do? Well, you can look it up, but if you're in a conversation, what are you going to do? Yeah, you're going to go around it. You teach students survival strategies, and one of the survival strategies is if you don't know a word for something, either explain it out or go around it. until you figure out what the word is. Now, this is one of the ways that you can teach students to think in the language, because they're going to come back with you and they're going to say, but I don't know the word for this. Well, find a way to say it. This was what the second part of what my French teacher told me was, learn how to say it, even if you don't know what the word is. Okay? And in French, I had a nice Madagascar lady who was a friend of mine, and she taught me a very wonderful word in French, truc. It's a truc, a truc. A truc is a thing, a trick. And if you can't explain something, it's a truc. Okay, well, I used truc a lot because I just avoided everything until I eventually figured out how to say it. But it didn't stop me from increasing my fluency by learning how to think in the language. Okay? It's like saying whatchamacallit in English. It's a truc. Whatchamacallit is a way that we native speakers, of course, will go around something when we don't know how to say it. Because whether we like to believe it or not, even in our native language, we don't know the word for everything. And Japanese students are the same way. They will find kanji they can't read, or they will mispronounce the kanji. They go around it. I would encourage you to try to teach your students. Find a way to teach your students to think in the L2. You'll be doing a service to them, and you'll be doing a service to me when they get to me. Please. When it's not the materials, okay? When it's not the materials. Okay, you can have the best materials in the world, and sometimes it just won't work. And you have to be able to figure out what the problem is. Is it a problem with large classes? Is it a problem that my students won't speak? Is it teachers who say, my students can't do that? Every time you suggest a new idea, my students can't do that. Well, if you have that answer, then they never will be able to do that. What about entrance exams? What about those who say there is not enough time? Time management is always a crucial issue. You're always balancing the clock and trying to get through everything. What about grading? And those who argue that it's harder to grade things, like speaking. It's easy to grade multiple choice. There's a right answer, and there's a wrong answer. But actually, if you're into testing, there's a whole lot more to it than that. Percentages of distractors, accuracy, reliability, validity, all the good stuff. But is it the best thing we're doing for our students? Okay. Large classes, you have to make accommodations for large classes. Japanese classes are slowly getting larger as schools consolidate. Okay. My classes are getting larger at Shogai. Okay. What do you do with them? Pair work, group work? You can still do it with large classes. Okay. I just had you doing pair work. There's 300 in here. You can do it. Okay? It doesn't have to be teacher-centered. Students who won't speak, that's a challenge at every level here in Japan. And you have to figure out what is the problem. Why is it that they're not speaking? Is it a personality issue? Is it something like what we talked about with making mistakes? Is it that they don't like you? Is it some past experience they had that they didn't like it? Or is there something else going on? You have to figure that out and adjust to it. Teachers who say, my students can't do that. Well, the answer, of course, is, and if we don't try, they never will. So we have to try something. Entrance exams. What I want you to know about entrance exams is that we are aware of what's going on in the high schools, and we try to adjust what we're doing to influence what you're doing. It may sound top-down, it is. It's very top-down. But we're trying. Okay? There's not enough time. You're going to have to figure that out. Time management. And grading. I like holistic grading. I really do. Holistic grading is getting an overall impression of what the student can do by looking at it repeatedly. For speaking classes, for example, having tests all the time, unless you're doing speaking tests, it's not going to accurately represent what they can do for speaking. Unless whatever kind of test you're doing is productive in a way that represents speech. It's just a fact of life. With speaking, you're going to have to grade somewhat holistically. It's going to be impressionistic. Can the student do this? And then you're going to have to decide things like, well, student A is grammatically correct, but every sentence is short because the student is afraid to make a mistake. And you're going to have to compare that to student B. And student B is a student who is taking risks. They make mistakes, but their sentences are more grammatically complex. They're trying to use the vocabulary and the grammar. They may make a mistake or two, and they're certainly not as perfect as student A. You have to decide which one. Okay? Personally, I want my students to take risks with the language. The language requires it. If the only sentences you're using are perfect sentences, you're going to sound weird. Have you ever heard of Del Hymes? Del Hymes is an anthropologist. He's probably retired now. He was in the southeast of America somewhere, North Carolina or someplace. Anyway, Hymes referred to what he calls the social monster. Okay? A student who knows the rules and only the rules of the grammar with no understanding of how and when it is appropriate to use that language will be a social monster. So there's more to it than the grammar. That was basically his point. You have to understand when it's appropriate to use, how it's appropriate to use, all the pragmatic stuff. Okay? So that's why I would favor the second student over the student who's perfect and only uses short, perfect sentences. All right, your second exercise. Okay? It says 15 minutes. I'm going to cut this short. We're going to do it 5 to 10 minutes. One of the most basic grammar points we teach students is to differentiate between the present tense and the present progressive tense. Okay? I go versus I am going. Assume that your students are having trouble differentiating between the two. Your students are still making mistakes between the two. Create an exercise that very simply presents the rule again and gets the students to use the language to show the difference between the two, so progressive activity. And share it with the teacher next to you. You have 7 minutes. Go. The rule is quite simple between these things. I would probably start with some basic question to the students. Are you doing this now, or are you doing this again and again and again? Is it a repetitive thing? I go to the swimming pool sometimes. I'm going to the swimming pool now. Okay, that's kind of how I would explain it. What activity I would create from that? Honestly, I didn't actually sit and think about it because I wanted you to think about it. But I'd probably get them to use it repeatedly. What are you going to do right now, and what are you going to do later? Yeah?
Well, you can also do like holidays versus standard meetings and holiday balls.
How so?
Well, you can be like, so what do you only do on holiday Tuesday versus what you do every Tuesday?
That's a good way of doing it. Yeah, that'll work. Yeah.
Can you say it again, because some of us couldn't hear it?
Stand up and be loud.
Okay, ALT voice time. So what you can do is you can do holidays versus the same day of the week. So if there's a holiday that falls on Tuesday, aka the Emperor's birthday this year, you can ask them things like, okay, so every Tuesday, what do you do?
And then for this day, what you only do this day. And you can get them to differentiate between them actually pretty clearly. You can even go into a Venn diagram style where you can also look for a little bit of overlap.
Thank you. Okay, I have one more right there. Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How are you today?
Okay.
I'm so sorry. So for the basic present versus present progressive, I like doing a diagram on the board with pictures.
Yeah.
But for the activity, on the board, we divide the board in half. One is labeled present, one is labeled present progressive. Each student is given a picture of a famous person, is usually the easiest. It can also be your teacher to make it funny. Anpan works for this. Beyonce would work, they all know who Beyonce is.
Yeah.
One is a picture of just the person or character. One is a picture of what they do. And then they have to stick it on the right side of the board and then write the complete sentence next to it.
Okay.
So Beyonce sings, Beyonce is singing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And there's one right in the center. Yeah.
So we talked about using resources that you might have right there in the classroom.
Yeah.
Most classrooms are going to have their schedule for at least the day, if not the next couple of days written up.
Yep.
And in my case, I talked about the difference, using the difference between our weekly schedule, which is very repetitive, and their Kyusho, their meal schedule, which is very different every day,
Yeah.
because they never have the same meal twice in a month.
Sure.
So kind of comparing frequency of things, like you're studying English every day versus you're eating curry on January 12th.
Yeah, that's something that's really good because that's really approachable to the students because that's something that's actually affecting them right now. Okay, very good. Okay, so I just wanted to take a few minutes and give you a chance to go through that exercise. I'm coming up on my conclusions now. We're just about out of time. What I want to hope that you got from this was get creative and get productive. Production is the key word here. Look for opportunities to make the class more productive. Productive activities do not require a major shift in time management. They only require small changes. Unless you're involved in very teacher-centered grammar translation classes, and then it requires a lot more effort. Keep the activities that work, discard or change the ones that don't. And save up those activities. I mentioned save them up. Save them up because it's not that hard to do what I'm doing. To move from a pile of assignments that you've been putting together to the creation of a textbook. And I find it very fulfilling and very interesting to work on this subject. It really makes me think about what my students need and what they're interested in. Okay? Encourage your students to use the language. Encourage them to think in the language and encourage them to succeed in the language. Thank you. They asked me to wrap it up at 40, so we're a little bit early, so I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Clancy. Please give another round of applause for Ms. Stewart.